Hello, this is Books in the World. My name is Bob Reese, and I'm here today interviewing Edwin Hill, who is the author of The Missing Ones. He's also the author of Little Comfort. The Missing One is Edwin's second book. His first novel, Little Comfort, was reviewed favorably by Booklist, Kirkus Reviews, Publishers Weekly, and The Strand magazine. Thanks for coming, Edwin.
Thank you very much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? Go to school? How did you get started writing?
Sure. So I grew up on the South Shore. I grew up in Duxbury, Massachusetts, graduated from Duxbury High School. How I got started writing was my parents were big readers. They always read to us growing up. And when I was about 11 years old or so, we used to go on these month-long family camping trips. We'd all pile into the car and drive across the country and camp all over the country. And that summer, I think I was 11 years old, I was sort of making that transition from children's literature to adult literature. And we stopped at a gas station. This was back when you could still buy books at gas stations. And my parents bought me a copy of The Seven Dials mystery by Agatha Christie. Mm-hmm. And I'd never read anything like that in my life. And I just really fell in love with it. This is one of her earlier novels. It's set at a manor house. It's set in the 20s. It's a very exciting time. I love the language of it. I love the way that the way she pieced the story together. And I finished that book, and I thought, this is what I want to do with my life. And it only took me about 36 years to figure out how to do it. So I graduated from Duxbury High School. I wound up going to school in Connecticut, and then off to California for a number of years. And the whole time I was writing sort of on the side. When I was in California, it was during the .com boom. So when that busted, I decided to come back east, and I went to Emerson College and got an MFA. But still, I worked for quite a while before I got a publishing contract.
So most of your books have been mysteries?
Yeah, all of them have been mysteries.
All of them have been mysteries.
Yep.
The reason I ask is because the book that I got when I was about the age that you're describing was Moby Dick. That was a heck of a book for a young person to digest, and I'm rereading it now. It's very interesting. You've written in the Ellery Queen Mystery magazine. You've already said what drew you to the mystery genre. But did you do a lot of articles in Mystery Magazine? How did that work out?
No, it's interesting. I worked on my writing for a number of years, and really had absolutely no luck in selling anything. Mm-hmm. And I just kept kind of toiling away. I didn't, it's just a hobby for the longest time. But after I sold my first book is called Little Comfort. Right after I sold that, part of the editing process for that first book was I pulled out a secondary character who I liked a lot, and just didn't fit into the final manuscript. And so I took all of that material that I had pulled out of the novel, and I decided to turn it into a short story. And I sent it to Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, which is one of the premier mystery magazines out there. And they bought that too. So it was just so interesting to have had no success for the longest of times, and then to suddenly sell two things within the space of a couple months.
Well, in talking to many authors, I have heard that same story of getting 73 rejection letters, you didn't get that many, but...
Oh, no, I did.
But it seems to be a common experience of authors trying to get started and getting rejection letters from almost everybody they send. And then suddenly they hit on the right one, and it may be that the person who actually reads that successful novel just happens to like the way you write better than the other people did. Well, characters and plot and story are the three major things in fiction writing, as you know. And your characters struck me as being very, very interesting characters in The Missing Ones. I was struck mostly by the names that you assigned to these characters. Let me just mention a few of the names. Lydia, Rory, Hester, Morgan, Daphne, Vaughn, Trey, and Angela. Now, these are not names that you hear every day on the street. So did those come to you in the night, or how did they?
No. When I'm doing a draft of a novel, I actually name characters very, very quickly. Names are something that you can, when you're drafting, you just want to keep moving forward. And names are something that you can easily get caught up on. And all of a sudden, 5 hours have gone by and you've been on baby naming sites for days. So oftentimes I'll just name a character very quickly, and then I'll look at the name later on and see how I can change it. So Trey, in this novel, there's a character called Trey, and I wanted that character to have a very preppy name. And so I just kind of went through, his name was something else for a very long time. And then when I finally got ready to sort of hone in on what his name would be, I just kind of went through what a bunch of different preppy names might be, and that was one that I landed on. I also do a couple of different exercises when I'm drafting. I like to mostly have characters, the first letter of all characters be different. So if you have one character that begins with a T, you don't want to have too many. You don't want to have other characters who also begin with T. It helps people parse out the characters as they're reading the novels. So I'll do things like that. With Hester Thursby, this is the Hester Thursby series, and that name came to me in a bunch of different ways. Again, I name characters very quickly. So when I first came up with Hester as a character, the only thing I knew about her was that she was a woman. I knew she was a 36-year-old woman, and that she had a child she was responsible for. And so because I do this quickly, I said, I'm going to call her Hester, and I'm going to call the child Pearl, which is so pretentious I almost throw up in my mouth whenever I tell that story. So the very next day, I was like, well, Pearl has got to go. That's just not going to work. So I changed Pearl's name to Kate, which stuck. But I liked the name Hester, and I thought, why don't we just leave that there for a little while? And that, so I got comfortable with it. When it came time to really consider whether I wanted to keep the name or not, I decided that I would keep it. When I first started Little Comfort, the first book in the series, Little Comfort is actually a very dark story, but when I first started writing it, I thought it was going to be more of a light-hearted mystery, and Hester as a character loves movies. She still loves the movies in the final draft, but when I first started drafting, she liked to watch romantic comedies, and so for a while the title of the novel was going to be His Girl Thursby, sort of a play on His Girl Friday, but once it became darker, that title didn't fit anymore, but the name Hester Thursby did stick.
But Hester reminds me of another classic novel, Hester Prynne.
Oh, sure.
But you don't hear Hester very often on the street. I mean, it's not a common name. The other name that struck me wasn't a character, but it was the place. And it's Finisterre, is that how you say it?
Finisterre, yep.
Finisterre. Having had Latin as a high schooler, it sounds like Land's End to me.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And that's a great name for an island, and it's not the real name for the island.
No.
It's your invented name.
Yep. So I'll tell you. So the name Finisterre. So this novel, the second novel, The Missing Ones, most of the action takes place on a very small island in the Gulf of Maine. It's 8 miles off the coast of Boothbay Harbor. And Hester winds up traveling there as a storm is bearing down on the island, and a child goes missing. I originally set this on the very real Monhegan Island, which is also 8 miles off the coast of Boothbay Harbor. It's a 4 square mile island where no cars are allowed. It's a very, very beautiful place. As I started drafting the novel, I needed to make some changes to the island plot-wise. Monhegan doesn't have a police force, and I needed a police force to be there. So that's a big change. And once you start making I needed to change the landscape of the island a little bit. And once you take a very specific place like Monhegan and start fiddling with it like that, it can't be Monhegan anymore. Another thing is that Monhegan, only 50 people live there year-round, and there are a lot of awful people in this novel, so I thought, who wants to have their home represented as being filled with awful people, especially when there are only 40 people. It's one thing to do that when it's Boston or New York, but very different when it's something so specific like that. So I decided to change the name. And I always say the beauty is from Monhegan, all of the horrible people are from me.
So you didn't want to stigmatize Monhegan.
No.
That's very considerate.
Thank you.
Tell me about how you began thinking about this novel and the setting, and how did this come to your lying in bed at night? Were you did you get a sudden epiphany about this story?
Oh, sure. So this is the second book in this series. So when you're writing a series, it's a little bit different than when you're writing a standalone novel, because you're caring for what you've learned from the prior novel or the prior novels into this current novel. So for anyone who's read Little Comfort, I will tell. I don't want to give too much away about this novel, but I will tell you there is probably a burning question that you have coming out of Little Comfort that I try to answer in this novel. And so having finished that novel, I knew that I needed to answer that question for readers. So that's really what I set out to do. So I said, my first question was, how do I answer this question? And my second question was, who are the main characters in this story going to be? And so I always tell stories in multiple points of view. Little Comfort is told from 5 points of view. In The Missing Ones, it's told in 4 points of view. So the 4 characters in this novel are Hester Thursby, who's the main protagonist. Hester has a partner named Morgan. They share a house together in Somerville. And they're not married, but they're almost married. So Morgan is one of the point of view characters as well, which was kind of nice. One of the things I got from readers from the first book was that they liked Morgan and they wanted to learn more about him. So it was nice that I made that decision and was able to bring him into the story. Then I brought in 2 new characters for this story. So one is a guy named Rory. He's the police constable on the island, and he's responsible for law and order on this very tiny island, which is a big job during this story, because during this story there are both missing children and a very dangerous storm that's bearing down on the island, and he has to manage all of that. And then there's a 4th character named Annie, who is basically a homeless woman who lives on the island. And she, when you live on an island with only 40 to 50 people, it's a small, closed community, and she's trying to find her way into that community while also being, being someone who they may not necessarily want to know.
And Annie's a very complex character, and I won't, no spoilers here, but she's a very interesting character, I must say, and one that bears some attention. The dilapidated Victorian house on the edge of the island, I love that. I mean, it's so Agatha Christie. I mean, it is really a mysterious place. And then you add to that the police visits that go to the Victorian house to investigate all kinds of goings-on in the house. The setup's complete, and it's really a perfect setting. You can almost visualize this in a movie. How did you conjure that place up?
Well, that's sort of what I wonder, I would have to trace that back, but that was definitely not something that I started the novel with. That's something that I came up with during the drafting process. So at one point I had to ask myself, where does Annie live? I mean, oftentimes when you're drafting a novel, you're just asking yourself a series of questions and you have to figure out what the answers are. So that question was, where does this homeless person live on this island where, people mostly only have private houses? So I thought, well, there's got to be some place where people who this type of person goes. And so I decided that it would be a house where the missing go, where the lost go. So Annie's not the only one who lives there. There are other people who come and go. It's a place where people who are looking to disappear would go to live for a short period of time. And you find those places in Maine. I was in a writing group, and someone said something to the effect of, Maine is a place where you can go to disappear. And I thought, Annie's someone who wants to disappear. Where is she going to go to disappear on this island?
And so the Victorian house is an
appeared.
ideal place. Hester Thursby, your protagonist in Little Comfort, she's back in The Missing Ones. Now, you mentioned something earlier that's interesting to me, and that is you must have anticipated there was going to be a sequel, because you left the question unanswered at the end of Little Comfort. And in one of my books, I ended the book fairly abruptly, and some people didn't like it because it was abrupt. But I was thinking, well, that's only the beginning of the next story. Is that how you looked at the Hester Thursby?
Yeah, I wanted to put. When you're writing a series, you want the book to be complete. You don't want the reader to leave and feel like, what happened here.
Right.
But you do want to have some unanswered questions. It's like writing a TV series. You want to have some questions that carry you into the next episode, but they have to be fair enough questions to your readers, in my opinion. So I sort of, when I look at this series, I kind of imagine it as an 8-book series, and I have certain questions that I'm trying to answer in each of about the emotional life of Hester and Morgan, who are the central characters in the books. I try to answer very specific questions about their emotional life. I don't have the crimes worked out for all 8 books, but I kind of know where they're going as characters.
Well, Hester has a need to take care of a child, doesn't she? Tell us a little bit about her relationship with Kate.
Oh, sure. So in the first book, in Little Comfort, one of the big premises in Little Comfort is that Hester has been left with this child. It's not her child. It's Morgan's niece. Morgan has a twin sister named Daphne who's like hightailed it out of town and left this 3-year-old behind. In the first book, Morgan is in the background a little bit in the first book, but he's definitely having some challenges dealing with the fact that his sister has left, and he's removed himself emotionally from the situation. And so Hester, who does not have kids, she's a 36-year-old woman who has decided not to have children, is suddenly responsible for this 3-year-old, and she's not thrilled about it. And that's a big part of the novel. At the same time, Hester's whole shtick is that she finds missing people. She's a researcher, and on the side, she will find people who have gone missing. And in the first book, she finds the person she's looking for winds up being a serial killer. And she exposes both herself and Kate to quite a bit of danger. And the second book, what happens in the second book is she's recovering from that trauma. For the first few chapters, she's recovering from that trauma. I really wanted to make sure that she was addressing what had happened in the first book, and that carried through. So Kate goes with her almost everywhere. She's now 4 years old. Let me say that again. She's now 4 years old in the second book. And I think Hester has matured as a caretaker, but she's also regressed a little bit as a caretaker. As we enter this story, Hester has stopped going to work, and she doesn't let Kate go to school anymore. And in great Hester Thursby tradition, if anyone has read Little Comfort, you'll understand this. In great Hester Thursby tradition, she, of course, hides all of this from Morgan. She doesn't tell him anything about this.
She has sort of an arm's length relationship with Morgan, it seems, in some ways, and yet she's the two of them are pretty much devoted to each other, and are in love with each other, if you want to put it that way. We're left at the end of the book wondering what will happen to some of the characters. And my question before I started talking to you was, does this mean a sequel is in the works? And you've answered that adequately already. We'll see more of Hester and Morgan and the others. How many of these will you do, the Thursby sequels? How many would you envision doing?
Well, I will do them until they stop being fresh, or like one before they stop being fresh, because I said I've mapped out 8 of them, the emotional story for 8. Some series can go and go and go and go, and this might be one of those. Other series, they sort of peter out, and I hope as an author I'm able to see like when that time might have come, and just move on to another series instead.
Good. Let's talk about the publishing game a little bit.
Oh, sure.
Because one of the questions that I often get from other authors as we go to Writers' Night Out or other kinds of things that the Cape Cod Writers Center sponsors, the question is, now I've done all this work, how do I get this thing into the hands of the readers that I want to read it? And how does that happen for you?
Oh, sure. I mean, I can talk to you about traditional publishing. There are lots of routes to publishing. The one I know about is traditional publishing. And what I like to say is that there are various portals that you have to get through as you're going through this. The most important portal that you have to get through, just kind of think of them as getting narrower like this. The most important portal to get through is to finish your book, and I'll tell you a little story about that in a sec. The second portal is you have to find an agent, and the way you find agents, you can find lots of websites about about this is you write query letters to agents, you go to conferences to meet agents, you meet as many people as you can, and your agent, once you found an agent, that agent represents your work with publishers. It's not impossible, but it's very hard to publish a novel with a traditional publisher without an agent backing you up, because they have all the access. So the third portal is finding that publisher, and the fourth portal is finding an audience, which is what I'm doing right now. So you're always working toward that goal. So I'll tell you a little story. I wrote another novel. I finished my MFA from Emerson College in 2002. I wrote another novel, and I got an agent. So I got through Portal 1 and Portal 2. I got a very fancy agent, New York agent. We shopped it all around New York, and it didn't sell anywhere. And the reason why it didn't sell anywhere, I'll get to that in a sec, I kind of gave up at that point. It was very discouraging to have it rejected everywhere. So flash forward many years later, I have finished 2 books, and I am looking to start a third one. I have a contract for a third book, and I thought, well, why don't I dust off that old manuscript that went around New York and got rejected everywhere and see if I can turn it into something. I picked it up, and I read about 10 pages of it, and guess what? It was terrible. There was a reason why it didn't sell anywhere. And when it was getting rejected everywhere, the publishers that were rejecting it were trying to tell me that this isn't ready to go out. So I had to go all the way back to the beginning and find a manuscript. That first portal, I had to find a manuscript that was ready to submit.
And how do you know that? How do you know when that manuscript is ready for somebody else to look at it, somebody critical, who's important to the success of that thing getting to
Well, you want to pay
publisher?
attention to your gut. So if your gut's telling you that maybe this is ready, keep working at it a little bit. But another thing, there are lots of tools that you can use. I use a group of beta readers, and beta readers are not my friends. They're not my parents. They're not people that I even really know all that well. Beta readers are people who can read critically and tell me whether something is ready or not. And I trust them to do that. So that's one of the tools that I use for that.
And how do you find beta readers?
Oh, you just ask around. You can join. You can find some through Facebook, like through people
really?
who just read a lot on Facebook. You can find readers groups and just ask people if they'll look at it.
These are sort of Socratic questions. You were mentioned favorably in the Globe recently, and does your publisher make up those arrangements? Do they make the contacts for you, or do you do it, or is it a combination?
I have a fantastic publicity team at my publisher, and they have a ton of connections. Basically, they have media connections. The publicist does, and they'll send out pitches to various media to see if the Boston Globe is interested in picking something up, or the Associated Press is interested in picking something up. And obviously, if I have any connections, I let them know, but I usually let them take the lead with that kind of stuff.
It's interesting also to me that a lot of authors that you see on the big time reviews, like PBS at the end of the PBS NewsHour, these are people who are already very, very well established, either as journalists, and many of the things that they're talking about are very timely subjects that are in the news at the moment. But mystery is something that's completely different from that, and so it requires a whole different set of contacts and skills, right?
Yeah. Fiction is obviously going to be different than nonfiction. With any of this, you want your book to be noticed, and you want your book to find that audience that you're looking for, and you want to build a team around you that can help get that word out, that can get you on shows like this one, where you can talk to people in the public who might be interested in reading a dark psychological thriller set here in Massachusetts. And there are lots of people who are interested in things like that. You're just trying to find a way to line yourself up with the right audience there. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else you would like to say about either of your books, Little Comfort or The Missing Ones?
Oh, I mean, I would just say I just said this, but if you're interested in dark psychological thrillers, if you like authors like Ruth Ware, or you like Louise Penny or Kate Atkinson, I think these would be books that you would be interested in reading. Well,
I can say that it was a pleasure to read this book, and as I told you before we started the interview, I've done a lot of mystery reading, and I had this one figured out about 3/4 of the way through, and I was really proud of myself for doing that. So it was very good to do. Okay, anything else that you would like to say? We have just a couple of minutes left.
Oh, no, I mean, if you want to find me on the web, you can go to my website, which is edwin-hill.com. I'd love to hear from you, and let me know what you think about the books.
Okay. I've been talking today with Edwin Hill, the author of The Missing Ones, which is his current Hester Thursby novel. And he has written Little Comfort before that, and is in the process of writing a third novel, which will also be Scott. Why am I saying Scott? Hester Thursby novel. And we're hoping that you will rush to your bookstores. I suppose on the web is another way of obtaining this.
Actually, all of the books are available in the Clams Network for anyone who would be interested in taking it out of the library as well. Both Little Comfort and The Missing Ones are available at many of the libraries.
That's great. That's good. That's good to know. All right. I've been talking with Edwin Hill. This is Bob Reese and Books in the World. Thank you very much for coming. We appreciated your being here very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay.